Hi everyone, welcome to this stormy sky tutorial in Kerby Rosanes' new book, Mythic World. So as you can see, I've done a lot of coloured pencil work already, but now we need to work on this stormy, cloudy sky. So for this, I'm going to be using 4 Caran d'Ache Neocolors. These are Neocolor 2s, by the way, the aquarelle ones. And the colours that I'm using are Payne's Grey, Night Blue, Sky Blue and Flesh. So the first thing that I'm doing is going in with my darkest colour, which is the night blue, and I'm just adding colour into the heavily shaded areas of the clouds. So Kerby does loads and loads of shading for us, which is great. We can just add the dark colours in the liney bits and the light colours in the plain bits. So I'm going with the Payne's Grey up to the night blue, then adding some sky blue, and then on the very edges of the clouds, that flesh colour, just to show a little bit of light from the sun, a little bit of a glow on the clouds. And then obviously I'm using a water brush just to blend all of those together. Now, if you've seen any of my Neocolor tutorials before, you'll know that I do like to do a few layers and I have a bit of a process for it. So the first part of the process is to lay the pigment down on the paper, just scribbling it on with the crayon and then going over it with the water brush like I'm doing now. And then the second part of the process is to add some of the pigment from the crayon directly onto my paintbrush and paint it on over the top. And that is a little bit thicker and it helps the layers blend better because it's like directly mixing with water as you're putting it down. So yeah, that's all I'm doing at the moment is that first stage of the process. So I've gone in with dark to light in all the little crevices. I've made sure it's dark. The very shaded bits are always the darkest bits, and then just pulling it out towards the edge of the cloud, which is going to be the lightest bit. So just continuing with that, dabbing my brush. So technique can be important, especially when you're doing clouds. So just speeding that up a little bit now for you. So dabbing on your water brush will give you a dappled effect. So if you don't want a completely smooth, perfect gradient blend, you want a little bit of texture, dapple your water brush on there and it will create those little dots and dapples of colour. So again, just filling in with the crayon, the dark to light areas and then blending them out with the water brush. But at the moment it is quite dull and desaturated because we haven't put our layers on there yet. We haven't built up the colour. So just wait for it to get to the next bit and then I can tell you what we're doing after. So I'm just doing this kind of half of the clouds at this time and then I'll go on and complete the rest. So just adding in more colour, blending it out with the water. And as you can see, it always blends out to the fleshy tone. We don't want too much of that fleshy tone because it really is just to indicate that there's sun around there and it's kind of making the edges of the clouds glow and peeking around. So here I am doing the second part of this cluster. Quite good really because you can see it being done over and over again. Putting all the colours down first and then blending it. So don't blend it between every single colour. You must put your all your pigments down first and then go in and blend. And I always try to start from the lightest bit. So I would start with my water at the flesh so that we don't muddy up and sully that colour itself. Okay, so next stage of the process, as you can see, I am taking the pigment onto the brush from the crayon directly. So you just need to have a little bit of, a little minute or so of just mixing on the end of the crayon because that will activate the pigment and then it's going to be really, really thick and very saturated and vibrant for you. So you can see I'm starting off with the flesh this time rather than the dark areas because I really want to keep the integrity of the light in these clouds. It could easily get dark very, very quickly. So I've made sure to put a layer of the flesh back on, nice and thick and saturated before we go straight back into the dark. So here I've started obviously with the Payne's Grey and I'm putting in manually all of those areas of shade again, and you can see it's so much thicker and bolder and more saturated this time because we're taking the pigment directly from the source. We're not watering it down as much. And then obviously the next colour from that is going to be the night blue. just dib-dabbing that on, and again, at the same time, blending it with the Payne's Grey. So we are doing a bit of a on-paper blend this time. And the Payne's Grey, even if it's not still wet, it's fine. It will start to reactivate and blend out. So just adding in all of our night blue, and then coming back to the lightest blue, which is the sky, and blending that into our previous blue. Again, not wanting to get rid of the flesh tone, so being really careful not to completely cover the flesh area or even, you know, go too far up to it. We still want to keep that very edge of the flesh. So just popping in all of the sky blue there, and you can see it just really elevates it. It looks a lot more tumultuous and stormy and saturated than the other side. So right now I've got a clean brush, so I've not got any pigment on there whatsoever, and I'm working the line between the sky blue and the flesh because I just want that to be a little bit more blended looking, a little fluffier looking, whereas at the moment it's quite blocky. So using that wet brush just to blend out those lines a little bit, and then continuing with the rest of the clouds. So the same process again, taking the pigment from the crayon directly, applying it to the page, to all the darker areas, and making sure my strokes are all really fluffy and, you know, giving that look of texture with the clouds. So usually when I'm doing Neocolors, I will do a minimum of 3 layers. And on this one, I've only done 2 because I want to keep the look of some of the paper showing through underneath it, not being, you know, really, really opaque. I want to keep a slight bit of that texture and that look of not quite blendedness, because it just goes with the theme of what we're colouring, which is clouds, and they're all kind of dappled and they've got areas that aren't as thick, and you can see the sun poking through and stuff like that. So that's what I'm doing, again using a clean brush just to blend the areas. And then final step is to come back in with the flesh, because it really can disappear quite quickly, these areas of flesh tone, you know, when you're adding all the blues and things on there. So come back in with a final layer straight from the crayon of the flesh colour, and you'll see it just brightens it up an awful lot and just replaces the colour that we might have lost there. So that's what I'm doing at the moment, just adding in bits of flesh all over. And then and then final step, and this is optional, you can use a white gel pen, which I would recommend over a big fat Posca that I'm using, but that's all I could find today. A white gel pen just to add a little bit more glow and brightness to the edges of the clouds where we have that flesh tone. So only where the flesh is, just go over with a little bit of white on the line. So we're erasing Kerby's line just in that area. And if you are using a big fat Posca like me, you will end up getting really thick lines, which is not really what you want. You want it to be varied, but you don't want it to be super thick everywhere. So the best thing to do if that happens to you is to get yourself a colourless blender. I'm using a Prismacolor one here, any will do. And make sure it's super, super sharp. And then once the paint of the Posca has dried, you can go in and scrape away any thick bits. So you're just sort of moulding and shaping the white to where you want it. And we don't want it to be perfect. Clouds are not perfect. We want it to have a bit of a watercolory look. So it doesn't matter whether you scrape off too much or it's thinner and thicker in some areas. It's all good. And there we go. So I hope you've enjoyed this super quick tutorial. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.